Have you ever wondered what truly waits in the darkness along the border? It's not just officers or the relentless desert. There are things without names, shadows that follow, and whispers on the wind. Welcome to Horror Sector. Today we bring you true accounts of the paranormal on the world's most dangerous journey. Stories told by those who live them and live to tell. Are you ready to hear what dwells on the path? Crossing the border is a very difficult task. Many people don't make it, that's well known. But what no one tells you is that along the way, you can also encounter entities, things that shouldn't exist. I spent 2 days and 5 nights crossing, and during that time I saw horrible things. The coyote I hired took us to some warehouses on the outskirts of Sonora. There were about 40 of us there. There were entire families, young people and adults, all with the same goal: to cross. That night before leaving, the guide warned us about something. In the desert, don't talk much. And if you hear something strange, don't shout, don't run, don't look at them. At first I thought he was referring to animals, cattle snakes, the immigration authorities too. Normal things, you could say. But in those days, I understood that he was talking about something else. The first day we walked under an unbearable sun, and at night, a terrifying cold descended. But I preferred the cold to enduring the infernal heat. Just to give you an idea, our sneakers were scalding hot from the hot sand. It was so intense that by nightfall some people already had blisters and chapped lips, and there were still days to go. We spent the first early morning hidden among some large rocks for about 2 hours. Soon we continued walking. The guide ordered us not to turn on our flashlights, just to walk following him, in silence. I could barely speak from exhaustion. I don't know exactly where in the desert we were, but something happened there. One of the boys ahead pointed toward the horizon. There was a small hill very close to us. I saw the same thing he did. There were 3 very tall, thin figures walking in the darkness. They weren't human. They had the silhouette of a dog, but these things walked on 2 legs. They moved in a horrendous way. Several people screamed in fright, but the guide silenced them immediately. He hadn't put his hand over their mouths yet. He told us in a low voice to be quiet and not to look at them, that they didn't do anything unless we provoked them. No one spoke again. No one knew what those things were. We crouched down, watching those things slowly disappear into the hills. I'll never forget that image. The next night, the guide began telling us about all the people who had crossed. He said that many died trying and gave us an example. He pointed to a huge hill in the distance. 2 whole groups had once gotten stuck there, more than 70 people. They died from the low temperatures, including the guides. This was told to us with complete nonchalance. No one said anything, but we all felt it. That kind of awkward silence that creeps into the conversation. That night the air was freezing and the path to that hill seemed endless. We walked until the sun came out again, and we were finally able to rest in a kind of small cave. The exhaustion was unbearable. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. Every step hurt as if I were walking on sharp stones, and it was no wonder, since sometimes I had to go up and down rocky terrain. But that night was worse. The cold was so intense that many covered themselves with whatever they had: plastic sheeting, backpacks, even cardboard. We were walking. Around 2 a.m., the guide, somewhat frightened, told us to lie down quickly, and we did. We thought maybe a border patrol vehicle was coming, since they sometimes patrolled the area and we had to hide. But that morning, it wasn't them who were nearby. We all started seeing lights ahead, but we realized they weren't patrol cars. They were 2 balls of fire. They were hovering over some very, very large rocks. They began to approach and slowly passed overhead, just a few meters from us. As they passed overhead, we could feel the heat they emanated and an enormous, inexplicable fear. We lay on the sand for about 5 more minutes until the guide told us to stand up. Several of us asked what that was, what those things were, but he didn't speak. He only said that we had a long way to go. Some of us said they were witches, others that they were lost souls. I couldn't stop looking behind me. They were like small orange spheres moving silently. That night there was almost no rest. At dawn, several of us were trembling uncontrollably. 2 people fainted, and there was more to come. On the 3rd night, as we were walking in silence, we heard screams. They came from very far away. At first, we thought they were from someone else, that a group was calling for help, but the guide told us that wasn't possible, that they had taken another route and that we were miles away. However, that male scream, that heart-rending scream, was heard again in the distance. He quickly spoke to the other coyotes on the radio, and they all said they were fine. But here's the strange part. Even though the others were miles away, they said they had also heard those screams. They cut off communication and we kept walking. But the more we walked, the more the screams continued. They were drawn out with a strange, eerie tone. Sometimes they sounded like laughter, other times like wailing. The guide ordered us to keep walking, saying it wasn't some border patrol, it sounded like some lost soul. On the fourth day, almost no one spoke. We walked on autopilot. The sun burned us by day, and the icy wind cut our skin by night. I no longer felt hunger, only fear. Fear of everything, of being reported, fear of not arriving, fear of the supernatural, fear of whatever was moving behind us. Because yes, every now and then those behind us heard footsteps, but when they turned around, there was no one there. One of the women in the group started to cry. She said she heard her name, that someone was calling her from behind. The guide yelled at her not to turn around, not to stay put. The fifth day arrived. The guide told us we were very close, that a few more hours of walking and we would see the lights on the other side. But the desert seemed endless. When we finally reached a rocky area, we were able to rest. Night fell suddenly, and with it, silence. We rested for perhaps an hour and then continued. We were almost there. It's worth noting that at this point I was no longer in front. I was at the back helping those who could no longer go on. A man was helping me carry a young woman. Suddenly, the man helping me stopped. He said he was hearing footsteps behind us. I didn't want to tell him I was hearing them too, because I thought I was hallucinating. When we turned around, we didn't see anything. This happened several times. We could even hear someone running towards us, but when we turned around, there was nothing there. Several minutes later, we stopped to rest. We told the guide again what we had heard, and he said it was normal in the area, that if we prayed together, they wouldn't come near us again. And so, we did. We all began to pray quietly, trembling from the cold and from fear. We reached the other side almost at dawn, where a pickup truck was already waiting for us. That other smuggler took us to a warehouse on the other side in the United States. When we arrived, I felt like my body couldn't take anymore. I just fell to my knees and stayed there for several minutes. I won't lie, tears streamed down my face. Many were hugging each other, others just stared into space. I just stayed there thinking about everything we had seen, all those strange, paranormal things that happened there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, but I had lived it. I saw those things walk on two legs, those fireballs, those screams, those steps, in addition to the extreme heat and extreme cold. Seeing it from afar, it's incredible that people survive in those deserts. My name is Gerson, and I'm from Guatemala. I'm 20 years old and currently live in the United States. The story I'm about to tell happened when I was coming here. It happened when I was crossing through Chiapas, Mexico. The coyote told us we were going to sleep in a shack in the middle of a neighborhood, but there was no electricity. I remember it was freezing that night, so I went outside to smoke a joint. I had a cigarette. When I sat down and lit it, I felt something very, very close to me. A chill ran through my body, and my cigarette went out for no reason. I tried to relight it, but the lighter wouldn't ignite. My travel companions were already asleep. I was the only one awake. Suddenly, two dogs approached me and began barking incessantly. I didn't understand their behavior, but then I saw a figure stop and run away. What was strange was that it seemed to get up from the ground. Suddenly, the dogs began to whimper and drag themselves along in great pain. Following that, I heard laughter, a malevolent laugh, and in the distance a voice saying, "This is my house. If you don't leave, you won't get out alive." The voice then faded away, shouting. At that moment, my companions woke up and saw me standing there staring into space. I could still hear them talking to me in the distance. They asked if I was all right. When I came to, I told them what had happened. They all listened, and our guide told us something. He said that the house had belonged to a deceased person who used to appear when someone trespassed on their property. That same night, we left. The next night, another group arrived at the same house, and the exact same thing happened to them. But the tragic thing was that they actually stayed the night there. They didn't leave. The next day, when everyone woke up, 3 people were missing. A few kilometers further on, they were found dead in a vacant lot. The house where we slept afterward was a few blocks away. The following day, the other group told us what had happened, and we shared our experiences. That same night, everyone went to sleep, and, as usual, I stayed up to smoke my cigarette. Around 11:30, I saw a man approach me and say, "That's what happens when you don't obey." This was my experience. My name is Elias. I'm 25 years old, and I currently live in Texas. But what I'm about to tell you happened to me a few years ago. When I was still 18, my biggest dream was to cross into the United States. Many friends had gone and said they earned very well. The first time I tried, I couldn't. I got stuck at the border. I was scammed. I returned home with a face full of shame. From then on, I swore that if I ever tried again, I would succeed, even if it was the last thing I did. Years passed. I worked in agriculture, in construction, at anything I could to save money. Until one day I met a man, a smuggler, who claimed to be the best in the whole area. "With me you'll cross, no matter what," he told me. He charged me a hefty sum, but his confidence convinced me. He said everyone crossed with him. When I finally saved up the money, he gave me a date. He told me to meet him in the morning. I only took the bare necessities because the journey would be very difficult. We'd be crossing through the desert. So I got ready and said goodbye to my family. I promised them I'd look for them when I was on the other side. I only took light clothing, a thin blanket, and 3 bottles of water with electrolytes. I arrived at the spot he'd told me about, and they took me to a safe house in the middle of nowhere. There were many people there, men, women, even a young woman with her little boy, about 10 or 11 years old. In total, there were more than 60 of us, all with the same dream, to reach the north, to find a better life. That afternoon, the smuggler told us we would stay there for a whole day and that we would begin the journey the following night. We obeyed him. The night passed, and I couldn't sleep well. I managed about 2 hours. The next day, around 4 p.m., they moved us. We got into a pickup truck, and after a while, we arrived at the Tecate Desert. There, I realized we weren't the only ones. There were other groups walking in different directions, each carrying their own hopes. We started walking toward a specific bridge where we would hide and cross to the border that night, but I never imagined the desert heat could feel like that. It was a fire that burned your skin, draining your strength with every step. I'm sure the temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius. We'd only been walking for a few hours, and I had already finished 2 bottles of water. I only had 1 left, so I decided to save it for when I really needed it. But it truly is horrible to walk through the desert. The air was so hot it hurt to breathe. We walked until we reached the hiding place and stayed there, silent and still. When night finally fell, the heat disappeared, replaced by a bone-chilling cold, a chill that froze you to the bone. The desert changed drastically. By day, a campfire appeared, but by night it was an icy tomb. The guide told us it was time to walk. We walked through the night in that cold. I only had a very thin jacket and a blanket that barely covered me to the waist. The route through the desert wasn't easy. The terrain is uneven, there are rocks, thorns, and you have to go around or climb hills. Add to all that the dangers like immigration officials, scorpions, and snakes. After several hours of walking, my legs ached, and I could see everyone else complaining too. We stopped several times to rest, but the cold was treacherous. That morning we crossed the border, but it wasn't over yet, because we were going to hide for another whole day and continue walking at night. That morning, I remember many of us taking off our shoes. Some had sores on their feet, others were bleeding. The heat there was unbearable. You couldn't sleep like that. It's impossible, no matter how tired you are. Her skin was icy. We kept going. We had crossed part of the desert on the other side of the border. Along the way, we also found more people lying there, people from that same group. Some were still breathing, others weren't. Among them, we found that little boy crying next to his mother's body. A snake had bitten her. The guide and the group had left them behind. Julieta knelt beside him, took his hand and told him to come with her. The boy didn't want to leave his mother. I was already starting to feel unwell as my food had run out. The intense heat and lack of sleep were taking their toll, in addition to all the muscle pain. Night fell, and we began walking again along paths filled with sand, stones, and thorns. By dawn, I started feeling ill. Little by little, my body began to numb from the cold. My pace slowed until I ended up falling behind. The guide told us not to stop, to keep going together, and not to make any noise because there were snakes. It was getting harder and harder for me. I felt like my body wasn't responding. 2 men who were nearby helped me for a while, holding my arm, but when they saw the group moving away, they let go. I watched them leave without looking back, and there I was, alone. I just sat down on the sand. The cold was killing me. My head was spinning until soon I couldn't see anything anymore. I fainted. I woke up when someone shook me, followed by a soft woman's voice. "Hey, get up. If you stay here, you're going to die," she said. I opened my eyes and saw her. Well, I didn't see her completely because it was dark, but I noticed her slender figure with her hair loose. She was wearing ordinary clothes, everyday clothes, nothing warm. She took a water bottle out of her backpack, held it to my lips, and told me to drink it. I asked her where the group was. "They've already left," she replied. I told her that couldn't be possible, that the guide had told me and promised he wouldn't abandon anyone. She said yes, they often told lies like that, but not to worry because she knew the way. I don't know why, but I believed her. Her name was Julieta. She was 30 years old. That was all she told me about herself. She helped me up from the ground and took my hand. "Don't talk, just walk," she said. And so I did. We walked for hours in the dark. I could barely see where I was stepping, but she knew exactly where to go. Her hands were cold, colder than mine, but firm. I offered her my blanket. She smiled and shook her head. "I'm not cold, you can keep it," she said. But she was lying. I could feel her heart in the end, and she listened to Julieta. At that moment, my heart broke to see the child hugging his mother's body. He cried silently the whole way, because sometimes we had to hide since we could hear helicopters nearby searching for migrants. We met other people along the way. We formed a human chain holding hands, and Julieta led the way. Some of us could barely walk, but Julieta, still holding the boy's hand, kept walking. After a long while, we saw some shadows hidden in the distance. They were the others, those who had followed the smuggler. They had found a small natural shelter, a kind of crevice among the rocks where we all fit. When we saw them, Julieta told us, "Keep walking. They'll come by to take you to the urbanized area of California." We obeyed. I took a few steps, but I realized that Julieta didn't walk. I turned around to wait for her, to tell her we should go together, but Julieta was gone. She had vanished without a trace. We all turned around, looking for her. There was no way to hide. There was nothing around. A somewhat frightened woman began to pray. Another man who was standing next to me simply told me, quite shocked, that she had disappeared. I was more tired than scared. As we walked, the Lord beside me said, "She must have been one of the deceased, one of those who stayed behind here, and she helped us." I was speechless. Tears began to stream down my face as I walked, and as I did, I kept saying, "Thank you, Julieta. Thank you for saving me." I also thanked God. That morning, we arrived at the hiding place. We stayed there for a whole day, hidden from the sun and immigration officials. Some from the group gave us water, others shared their fried food. That's how we survived. And as I gazed at the desert through the opening in the rock, I could only think of her, of Julieta, of how she appeared out of nowhere, how she guided me, how she survived. She was never cold. I never saw her again, but she's one of those souls who stayed there. My name is Camila, and I'm from Honduras. What I'm about to tell you happened not in the desert but on the water during the journey across the Gulf of Mexico. We were 16 people in a lancha, a small fishing boat not meant for so many. The smuggler had promised us a short trip, just a few hours under the cover of night. The sea was calm when we left, but halfway across, the sky turned black and the waves grew tall as buildings. The engine sputtered and died. The smuggler cursed, trying to restart it, but it was useless. We were adrift. Water began to splash into the boat. We were bailing it out with our hands, with bottles, anything we could find. That's when we saw the lights. At first, we thought it was a ship, a Coast Guard vessel, and some people cried out in relief. But the lights did not move like a ship. They were beneath the surface of the water, glowing with a pale green light, like drowned fireflies. They circled our boat. An old woman from Veracruz who was with us began to pray the rosary. She whispered that they were Las Animas del Agua, the souls of those who had drowned in these waters. She said they were looking for company. The lights came closer, and as they did, the sea grew strangely calm, like glass. Then we heard the tapping. A soft, persistent tapping on the hull of the boat, like knuckles on wood. Tap, tap, tap. It came from all sides. We peered over the edge, but we saw only those green lights, deeper down. A young man named Luis, desperate, leaned over too far. A wave, though the sea was still calm, seemed to rise from nowhere and snatched him over the side. He vanished without a sound. The green lights swarmed where he had fallen. The old woman told us not to look into the water, to keep our eyes on the horizon. The tapping continued all night. By morning, the storm had passed, the lights were gone, and the engine, for no reason, started on the first try. We were 8 left. Luis was not the only one taken that night. The sea had been quiet, but it had not been empty. I am Mateo. My story is from the train they call La Bestia. For 7 nights we rode on top of a freight car, clinging to the metal ridges to keep from falling. The cold wind was a knife. We were not alone on that train. There were other migrants, but also there was something else. On the 3rd night, a man pointed to the next car over. A figure sat there, silhouetted against the moon, perfectly still as the train rattled and shook. It wore a wide-brimmed hat. No one remembered seeing it board. As our car passed closer on a curve, we saw its face. It had no features, just a smooth, dark surface like polished stone. It turned its head to follow us. Everyone on our car froze. A woman next to me fainted. It and we had to hold her tight to keep her from sliding off. The figure stood up. It walked along the top of its moving freight car as easily as if it were on solid ground, coming to the edge closest to us. It raised a hand and pointed, not at us, but at a man named Javier, who was huddled near the back of our group. Javier began to sob. He confessed then and there, shouting over the wind. He was not fleeing poverty, he was fleeing a crime, a murder he had committed in his hometown. The figure in the hat pointed at him for a long minute, then lowered its arm. It turned and walked back to its spot and sat down, again perfectly still. At the next bend, the train slowed slightly. Javier, crying uncontrollably, simply let go. He fell from the train into the darkness. We never heard him hit the ground. When we looked back, the figure in the hat was gone. The empty car where it had sat was covered in a thick layer of rust and dust, as if no one had set foot on it in years. No one spoke for the rest of the journey. We just held on, wondering who or what would be judged next. Every desert, every train, every river seems to hold its own horror stories. If this video made you feel that freezing night, or hear those footsteps behind you, then you know what lives in horror sector. Tell us in the comments, do you believe in these presences? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because the border between our world and another is thinner than you think. Until the next tale, good night.